Mastering life and business with your winning path. Come with us to master a path of success that will revolutionize your life and business journey. We provide strategies that transform dreams into reality, steering you towards victory. Immerse yourself in a reservoir of knowledge, unlocking potential and boosting confidence. By joining us, you will witness your capabilities unfold in ways you never imagined. Discover tools to conquer challenging terrains, staying resilient amidst hurdles. Embrace innovation, elevate performance, and watch your vision come alive. Together, we can conquer peaks and create a future beyond ordinary. So, start your journey with Innovate to Elevate today.
Welcome back to Innovate to Elevate. Start off the morning. Good morning, Jeremy.
Morning, Aaron. We're already well deep into this morning in case the listeners are really actually wondering. And no, it's not leftovers from last night. It's actually morning. Some of us got some sleep.
I got plenty of sleep last night. I think I was the first to sleep in the house, actually.
Wowzers. I know I was, because I always am.
Gotta love it. So today in this podcast, we're going to be talking about operational agreements. These are extremely important, crucial for several reasons, whether it's an LLC, corporation, sole proprietorship, doesn't really matter, but these agreements provide a clear framework for the internal operations of the business, how it should be ran. Where do you want to start this one?
Well, I think the best place to start would be any advice or thoughts that we're about to give or talk about are not legal advice and or accounting advice. So if you are creating an operating agreement, make sure you check with one or both of those professionals so that it makes sense for your business, your partnerships, however that's playing out. Honestly, that's probably a good place to start. Is to, most people, we talk about operating agreements, but what is actually included in them? What are things that we should be thinking about? We should be talking about. Aaron, you and I have been part of multiple businesses and multiple opportunities and kind of worked through these multiple times. So just kind of thinking, what are some of those parts, and some of the simple parts are like, who is operating the business, and one way you can probably think about it is like, what is the who, the what, the when, the where, the how, and also I think kind of including some sort of why in there in some of those cases is good, so you can kind of use those skills that you learned probably back in high school, right? When you're going to write something,
So, just to kind of go over, just for everyone to kind of think about what an operating agreement really has it in, and we can kind of break down each thing real quick. Some of the things that kind of come to my mind is defining roles and responsibilities, your profit distributions, the voting rights within the company, between the partners, between the owners, between shareholders, all of that fun stuff, the succession planning, and it also helps you customize like the business structure, right? It gives you legal protection, and it can, in a way, enhance the credibility of a company. And then you have all your default rules within the operating agreement. Am I necessarily missing anything that you can think of off the top of your head?
Some of the other kind of ancillary added items that some people put in there, they'll put in the buy sell agreement, right? If somebody wants in or out, depending on how that works, indemnifying the rest of each other, depending on what that looks like, going in or out, or even inside of. And really, this is something that's going to go in parallel with your corporate documents, which you kind of alluded to. Like, it gives you more credibility. And the other thing it does is it gives you a filter to run everything through. Like, does this align with our agreement? It makes it really clear. It makes it simple to talk about in terms of deciding, because then it's not any one person deciding. It removes, you've all decided that up front, and you can be like, well, let's put this against our agreement. Like, we've already talked about these things. So like, if there's a question, like, that should be your first place to go. And it becomes kind of, it's the SOP for your business, right? You're going to have SOPs inside of your business, and that's for a different podcast episode, because we don't want to go down the
real quick, and we'll break out the structure of an SOP in another podcast. But for those listeners that we have that don't know what an SOP is, It's a standard operating procedure. It's really what defines the way that a business or company or entity structures how they operate and what they do. I think that's the easiest way I can explain it without going into another episode.
Right. Yeah. That's the simple, like, Google explanation version of it. It just gives you kind of, I don't want to say peace of mind, but really that's what it is, because that's provided. There's clarity. There gives you an opportunity to move forward, and inside each of those little moments, or items, it's clearly defined, and that's where the discussions can be had. And I think you'll find out a lot more about each other and about how much stronger the business can be as you talk through those. You talked about defining roles and responsibilities. What would that look like? What are some things that you would want to be thinking about inside of there?
So, for me, and this comes from various partnerships that I've been in, you want to make sure that, especially when you're talking partnerships, what are the roles and responsibilities of each partner? One partner might be in charge of taking care of the financial stuff. One partner might be in charge of doing the marketing or leading the marketing. One person might be in charge of writing emails for the marketing. Someone else might be in charge of the operational stuff. But that's all fine and dandy when you're talking about an overall company structure. And there's roles and titles if you want to get into that for each of those. But it really goes further than even that when you're talking an operational agreement. For instance, who's going to the trade show for the company, right? That's not something that a role per se would be involved in when you're talking about owners. So this trade show, this person's going, this trade show, this person's going. And if that person doesn't go, what happens? Probably nothing the first time or two, but if they continuously skip out on their roles and responsibilities within the company, okay, now we need to talk about either the shares, distributions, whatever it might be. They might get less, they might get kicked out of the company. Who knows? I mean, that's ultimately something else within the operational agreement that's spelled out. If X, Y, and Z doesn't happen, then this happens. So, I mean, that's kind of how I would look at it. I know you can fill in a little bit more with your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, the beauty of this is, like, there's no predetermined anything. What it really comes down to is what's in the best interest of the company, what's in the best interest of how you're going to run your business, and what's in the best interest of the clients, right? Because without them, you're not actually a business, because you have to have clients coming in the door. So figuring out that, and one way to begin that process, right, is to start with, what are the people's strengths? What are they bringing to the table? What are they the best at? And then what are those roles that you need filled? You kind of talked about two different things a little bit. Part of that is like, let's call them board chair kind of seats, which if you have a corporation, you need to have, but if you have an LLC, you don't necessarily need to have. There's different rules, and that's the lawyer conversation you want to have. But if we're talking in terms of, like, let's just call it a corporation, you might have board members, you have a president and a financial or treasurer or secretary, kind of some of those board seat positions. But inside of the company, you might have a CEO, a COO, a CFO, and are the strengths of the people coming to the table, do they fit within those verticals? And if they do, then that might be a place to start to have that conversation and put those people in those places. And then find out, where do you have the gaps? And do any of those people have the ability to fill those gaps or be trained up and trained into, right? Because if your company is going to grow, you also need to grow, right? You need to elevate what you're doing. You need to bring your personal life and your business and elevate that and educate and gain new skills, because you're going to. But that gives you a chance to kind of fill in those gaps where you think that they are. Now, those gaps might be like, okay, we all know in the beginning that we want to hire for that particular position or role, but for the moment, there might not be enough revenue coming through the door to make that happen. So where's that going to happen in the beginning, so that in 6 months or 12 months or 18 months, whatever your strategic plan might look like, how do we get there? And what does that look like? And then as we transition to that, we have learned some things, we've grown, we've created SOPs for that position or for that role, right? And then when that role rolls out to it not being one of the owners per se, then it's already there, it's already created, it's ready to go. So, that's kind of a pretty deep dive into that part of it. But I think that this paints a picture of how important each one of the parts of this agreement is.
So just kind of recap, what we're saying for the audience is, and I'm just going to pick 4 people because we have companies with, we'll say 4 people as shareholders of a corporation. So this way we're not getting into the legal mumbo jumbo of this. So in what we do in one of the companies, which I will not mention, we have the CEO, we have the chief operations officer, we have a CFO, which is chief financial officer, and we have a CMO, chief marketing officer. So each of those roles are already defined for each person as far as your typical corporate structure and whatever it might be. Now, there's obviously stuff within that company that has to be done outside of those roles. So this is where this operational agreement would come in for the first 6 months, like Jeremy was saying. The CEO will do these things, the CMO will do these things, so on and so forth.
Right.
And then as we start hiring people to fill said positions, then those duties start backing off, and that part of the operational agreement goes away unless that role leaves. We fire the person quits, whatever it might be. Then whoever was in charge of that stuff before would come back in and start handling it again.
Correct. Right.
So that's kind of a real quick, down dirty recap for the listeners as far as the defining roles and responsibilities as I see it, the conversation we had.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a very succinct way to put all of the things that I just said. Way to go, Aaron. Way to be. Hey, that's called active listening. In case you aren't sure what that term is actually called, that's called active listening. I don't know that we want to dive into every single one of these specifically. What, in your mind, if we had to pick 2 more kind of topics within an operational agreement, like what would be the next one you would think about in terms of importance after roles and responsibilities?
Oh man. Okay. So that one's going to be hard. I would definitely say voting rights, because that's something that needs to be done, in my opinion, and probably legal protection of the entity, because those 2 things, profit sharing and succession planning at the end of the day can come at any point in time. But you really need to define roles and responsibilities. You need to have some kind of legal protection, and you need to understand where the votes are going, who's voting, how they're voting. In our case, like when we have 4 people voting, what 3 people vote and what person's a tiebreaker, how does that happen?
Right.
Everyone always wants to talk money, money, money. But at the end of the day, yes, money's important. But what happens if you get sued? Well, now the money doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, right? Because now it's everybody's problem.
Yep.
And we want it to be nobody's problem.
If you have to do profit sharing and no one can vote on how that profit sharing should be shared, no one's getting profit sharing. So that's why I would pick those 2 things personally. But that comes from a lot of my background as operational officer, those kind of backgrounds.
Right.
What would your 2 be?
It's funny, after you say that, I'm like, oh, well, maybe I would pick 2 different ones than what I was thinking. I think that the voting rights and the governance, like that's an important one for sure. If you don't know how to make decisions inside of it, and there's no guidance on how those decisions will be made, you could get stuck, right? And you don't want to be stuck inside of it. And if it's for things like what you're saying, like, well, how do we handle profit sharing, or how do we handle vendors? How do we handle really anything? If there's no way to vote about that and no process in place to do that or manage that, then what good is it? Things like, profit sharing or the financial side of it, like that really falls underneath there. Succession planning or buy-sell agreement, which is basically like if somebody wants to leave or someone is being asked to leave, right? Because both things can happen. Or God forbid, there's a life event that happens and someone has to leave, right? Those are all possibilities and all things that should be kind of spelled out inside of that space to make it very clear. But then it gives voting opportunities and clearly defines. And I think the one kind of theme that keeps coming back is being able to clearly define these things in each of the points, whatever they are, because you can make your operating agreement as robust or as lean as you want. I would err on the side of either somewhere in the middle or more towards robust. It's just more clearly defined, because
And I would
anytime you
say the
have to
same
have
thing.
a question, there's an opportunity for a problem. And it
Mhm.
doesn't matter if it's a big problem or small problem or any kind of problem, you're still in the people business. So you're dealing with people.
I look at an operational agreement a lot like I do an SOP. And coming from the government background that I have,
Sure.
I've had multiple SOPs for the various entities I worked for.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one of them being, I want to say it was somewhere around 800 pages of SOP that had to be memorized to a point. And then the other one it was somewhere around 300 pages, but they both did almost the same thing. One allowed you to operate a little more independently without getting in trouble,
Mm-hmm.
which was a lot easier to operate under, but it still gave every single bit of guidance that you needed to keep your butt out of jail. That
Right.
was the important part.
Right.
And the reason I bring those two things up is when you're writing these operational agreements, you need to make sure that you're very defined in what you're doing, because not only are you trying to protect yourself, but you're trying to protect your other partners, other shareholders, and the company.
Mm-hmm.
But you're also trying to give clarity for when something arises. I need to do X, Y, and Z. We need to do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
That's where I would err, kind of like what you're saying, somewhere in between. I don't know if I'd go full send off the diving board of make it 1,200 pages, but I think every operational agreement I've ever done is close to 30 pages minimum.
Yeah.
And granted, there's some cover pages in there and some
Sure. It's a
legal mumbo
document,
jumbo.
right? It lives as a document. So, there's going to be extra pages in there. But I think that illustrating that example of, is it 300 pages or 800 pages, depending on your company, there might be some things in there that you have to include that are federally guided or state guided, or there might be some sort of licensing organization that you have to live by. All those kinds of things should and have to be part of your operating agreement for your company's protection, right? Because some of it might not even be between the partners and the shareholders. It might just literally be because you have chosen to operate in this vertical, right? You have to have these things. Like if you're a bank, or if you're, I mean, those things are like,
Well, I mean, a perfect example of that would be, are you running a lawn care service in Delaware,
right,
or are you running a nonprofit in California?
right. Yeah, those are very different.
But when you're talking about an operational agreement, you're going from Delaware to California,
Right.
or
And a
like
lot
you
of
said.
that has to do with the state, right?
Yep. And when you start looking at especially nonprofits, and you could talk about this a lot more than I can in another episode, but nonprofit, you also have to worry about federal operation agreements,
Yep.
federal stuff, because the feds are really looking at you at that point because you are a nonprofit, not
Right.
just the state.
Yeah. And a lot of times, kind of actually the good and the bad of it, a lot of times in the nonprofit space, if you're receiving grant funds, or you're receiving funding from outside sources, a lot of times they have requirements, right? And honestly, that kind of makes it easier. Like, well, these are the guidelines I have to follow to even receive these funds to operate the way that I want to operate. And so in some cases, I'm actually part of two nonprofits, one that I'm closely part of, and then another one that I'm, on the board of directors for. And honestly, a lot of times, because of the funding sources and contracts and those, it makes those things easier to write, because you're like, well, I have to follow these guidelines and they tell me what I can and can't do. Otherwise, I won't receive the funds or I won't receive them again. Right. And obviously, nonprofits don't want that. So, again, that's knowing your business. How are you going to operate? And then, incorporating that on how you're going to do that, and you could get as nitty gritty in your operating agreement as like how you're going to run your day. Right now, I would argue that's more of an SOP. You're taking it that like, what are my daily tasks, or what is the daily responsibilities of this position, or those kinds of things. So to me, that really goes into that space. As long as you've clearly defined in an operating agreement what those roles and responsibilities are, it makes those easier. There are so many versions out there of these. Like, the web is littered with all sorts of templates. It's littered with versions. There's all sorts of websites that can help you kind of guide you through a process. I would say to use those as a getting started point. Go through them, use them. There are websites like LegalZoom will do it. Is it Rocket Lawyer? Is that another one? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's another one. Sites like that they do have guided templates that you can get through, but I would say use those as a template to start, have lots of discussions, ask other business owners what they've done or what their experiences have been. And then ultimately make sure you do get an attorney to look at it so that you are covered in all the language, especially as you're talking about governance and you're talking about legal protection for the company and the shareholders and the owners, that you kind of get that stamp of approval. And honestly, as a good owner, it should also be your responsibility to have your own attorney read that, because you are signing that document, right? Just because you've decided to enter into this business together, it might not be in your best interest to sign that agreement.
Well, and take that one step further when you get sued,
right?
Because it's not a matter of if, it's always when you're talking. As you grow, everyone wants to sue you. Having a corporate attorney that has already looked over that document, signed off on the document, and a personal attorney that has done the same protects you even more in court, because now they already know that it's in their language to fight that battle for you in court.
Right.
Versus coming in at the end and saying, I would have wrote this differently, and it's kind of hard to protect on this one part of it.
Right.
So that's the great thing about it, involving an attorney early on in the process.
Right.
Yes, it's going to cost you $1,000, but is that $1,000 worth $1 million down the line?
Correct. Right.
To me, that's a great investment.
So think about those things, ask lots of questions. Feel free to reach out to Aaron or myself. We'd love to have conversations and at least kind of get people talking through, or get you into the next step of what that might look like, or even maybe guide you into some resources or areas or other professionals that we might recommend to kind of make that happen. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you. Thank you. If you also notice, I have these killer new hoodie called Hustle to Elevate. So if you want some cool new gear, make sure to check that out. It's pretty awesome. It's
links in the description.
Yep. We'll add that in the description. We'll put a link down there for you. If you're just listening, trust us. It's cool looking and it feels great. So still check out the show notes. Go grab some gear. We'd love to have your support. Something Aaron and I are doing to kind of raise a lifestyle awareness of just being better humans in life and better partners in business. So thank you.
And what's the website they can go to for that?
The easiest way to get there is H2E gear.com. So H2E gear.com.
And then we're also going to be dropping a book about crafting up an operating agreement. It's going to be great. It's going to come out sometime next year, early next year, Q1.
And early next year, he's talking about early 2024, depending on when you're listening to this episode.
There you go. So if it's after Q1 of 2024, it's already dropped and you've been missing out.
Yeah. So go download it, go buy it, have it as a resource, send it to your friends, and check out all the other books and resources that have already been put out, because there's been a few. And again, we always appreciate your time an investment in yourself, in your business, to take a listen, to innovate, to elevate.
Later.
Mastering life and business with your winning path. Come with us to master a path of success that will revolutionize your life and business journey. We provide strategies that transform dreams into reality, steering you towards victory. Immerse yourself in a reservoir of knowledge, unlocking potential and boosting confidence. By joining us, you will witness your capabilities unfold in ways you never imagined. Discover tools to conquer challenging terrains, staying resilient amidst hurdles. Embrace innovation, elevate performance, and watch your vision come alive. Together, we can conquer peaks and create a future beyond ordinary. So, start your journey with Innovate to Elevate today.